So a firm connected AI straight to their systems, their CRM tool, SharePoint, their Microsoft Teams, Outlook, and it worked really well for them. They were able to get access to all this information that was in disparate systems, all surfaced in their AI tool. Great efficiencies were gained, better insights. All was good until the bill showed up, about $40,000 to be exact. That's a true story, and it's our world, and it is very, very common these days. And here's what gets me. All these publishers are racing to tell you what AI can do, and it can do a lot, but nobody's telling you what it costs, and that's not an accident. Hi, I'm Wes Snow, and this is the AI brief for CRE. That's my partner, Todd. He runs our product and services, and he's the one who actually watches these bills add up on our side. So he's here to keep me honest on the numbers. And really today we're going to focus on the thing that nobody warned you about. There's just a lack of this type of content out here. And that is, what does AI really cost once you put it to work? I'll be honest, this is not a theoretical issue. And that story, while it wasn't ours, I've dealt with this as well. I happen to use Claude, and I use it every day. It is as familiar to me as Outlook, emails, and things of that nature. And I have been using it without any concern or even consideration for token usage. I have a max plan, and for the most part, everything that I've been doing has fit nicely into that max plan until recently. I was sitting across a client, ironically, about a week ago, and we were talking about AI, and they had asked about token consumption. And I said, you know what, I've been leaning into this really, really hard for the last 6 months, and I've never hit a token wall. And then literally 2 days later, I hit that wall. I wasn't going to stop doing my job, and I would rely way too much on Claude. So I paid the piper to the tune of about $1,500 until my token allowance and allotment renewed. And that's unfortunately something that not many people warn you about. It caught me, and gosh, I do this for a living. So why? Well, these AI folks, it's not in their best interest. For starters, vendors, influencers, and the labs themselves, they're really focused on telling you what it can do and how you can reinvent how work gets done. But not many talk about, the meter. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. So Todd, in plain terms, when I ask AI a question, what am I actually paying for?
Well, every question has a price, and you're paying for two things. The model has to read what you give it, your question, and then it has to think about it. It has to reason over it. It may have some other research that needs to look up and find. And this is all basically, I don't want to say free, but it's the lower price of the equation. But once it starts to put output, once it starts to write and do those types of activities, it's much, much more expensive. So you'll hear things like tokens and credits. You just think of that as a meter, and those are units on the meter. And, the main thing is, if you're launching some sort of task, like a broker who just fires off an activity and says, summarize the activity on this deal, they don't actually understand, are they paying pennies or are they paying bucks? So that's the main thing to keep in mind. That's what you're paying for.
Yeah. So you and I listen to a lot of podcasts around AI and just trying to stay in front of things here. And the one podcast that really resonated with me was titled, "The Subsidy Era is Over and Scarcity Era Has Been Ushered In." And that, I think, is really what has caught everybody by surprise. For the longest time, these AI companies have basically provided you this for free to, get their land grab and market share and position themselves as a leader in the market. And, things change real quickly when you start being charged for it. Hate to use the metaphor, but kind of the drug pusher, give it away for free and then charge it once you're hooked. And I can tell you that I'm absolutely hooked on this. So it's promotional days of AI usage with these all-you-can-eat plans. Those are going away, if not already having gone away. So now that we're in that era, tell me a little bit about how this bill that I talked about earlier runs away from people. How do we manage that?
Yeah, speaking of podcasts, I was also listening to one, and they were interviewing, I think it was a Sequoia interview, and they were interviewing two women who run Anthropic's platform, or at least one of them was the one who runs the platform. And they were also talking about this era of token maxing, and that this was the push that a lot of companies were doing. And it was really, I mean, the intent was good. It was, we really want our team members to understand how to use AI. So the only way we know if they're using it is to tell them to use all of it, like as much as you can. Try everything, try to do everything with AI. That was the token maxing. And that was the KPI they were looking at to see, is their team adopting AI by looking at these reports. So now that the subsidy is not so great and that we're moving away from this token maxing, and companies are getting these $40,000 bills or many more bills related to this, the term that's starting to surface now is token rationalization. Like, let's use this smartly. Some companies have just turned off the spigot completely, and they're even saying, don't use AI. And that's an overcorrection, because AI is really something that can help you and really is a great tool. But token rationalization is a good way to think about it. Not what can this do, but what will it cost me? And do I need to use it for this task? So one of the ways that it's absolutely going to run away from you is when you give it unbounded jobs to do, where you just say, let's turn AI loose on handling all of these particular jobs and let it enrich the data. And then every time something comes in, let's enrich it. In the commercial real estate world, maybe it's like an inbound listing, and that listing could go viral. There could be hundreds of responses, and AI enriched and researched all of those inbound listings, and suddenly the bill's much higher than what you'd suspect. So that's one. Another option, or another area where it could get away from you, is the wrong model. And this one's hard. This one's seductive. New model comes out and you sense the capabilities are even better. You can see that it can solve problems or give you insights that you didn't have before. And the mindset is, my work is important, so I'm going to use this expensive model on absolutely everything I do. I don't want to make any compromises. And in that case, again, it's just going to probably exceed your budget in this case. And then the last one, it's about sprawl. And how would I describe this? It's like, there's ways you can use AI. And this one gets a little bit more technical, but bear with me a second. So every time you type a question or a message, it's not just your question that gets sent to the model. It's everything in the context, every MCP tool that's been connected, a description of every skill that has been connected. So if you're the type of user who's connected everything and sees everything as a way to use AI, then there's a lot of baggage that's getting sent in your request and that gets returned. And if you aren't refreshing your context or starting new discussions from time to time, like when the topic changes, then you're actually paying for a lot of tokens that you're not actually using. The fourth one I should mention, and honestly, it might even be bigger than the other three, it's just rework. So there was a study that came out of UT Austin. They did it inside KPMG, about 8 months, 2,500 people is what I remember. They studied around 4 million prompts and sessions, and they found that 90% of these users at KPMG were using AI, but only about 5% of them were using it well. That's not a technology problem. That's a technique problem. The thing is, every one of those wasted round trips were metered. So a broker that takes the minute to brief it properly gets 2 passes. The ones who don't, they take 8. Same question, 4 times the bill, and probably getting a worse answer at the end of it. And I don't want anyone to hear that and think that they've got to turn their brokers into prompt engineers. That's certainly not the case. But some study actually found the opposite, that people getting the most out of it were the ones writing more casually and more formally. There's no magic words to this. They were just being specific about what they wanted, putting some boundaries around it, pushing back on the first answer instead of just taking it. And that's not a technical skill. That's just knowing how to brief somebody.
What you just described reminded me of a little incident I had earlier. As I mentioned at the top of the podcast here, I had been going along with Claude and never having once been prompted for, hey, you've run out of credits. You want to top off. And I was not remembering any different patterns of usage, but then I remembered having set up an agent, if you will, or a batch process in Claude that went out and it read all of my emails in my inbox. And it also read who those senders were and matched them up against records inside of my CRM system, and had it go through and record all of those emails directly into the CRM system. Didn't put any boundaries on it. and said, hey, run this every 3 hours. It's beneficial, obviously, to have those emails connected to the records inside of CRM. Set it, and I forgot about it. And it did its job. And it wasn't till yesterday when you and I were chatting about this very podcast that it had an aha moment that probably is what's causing this. And ironically, I flipped over to Claude, and sure enough, it was churning away, and I didn't set the right model. I defaulted it to Opus, whatever, and that's the default there. And that job absolutely could have been done by a different model there. But I was lazy, and I was excited, as we all are, about benefiting from AI, and didn't put much thought into it, and ultimately had to turn that off and change the way in which it was structured there. So, reality is AI is really cool until you start flipping the price tags over, like you're shopping. I want this shirt, I want that shirt. And then you start flipping, maybe I don't want it that much. And so I had gotten lazy, and I think we're all going to be having to think more prudently about when do we use AI and how do we use it responsibly, in that it's not just a free for all. There is a cost associated with this, and that enthusiasm and that excitement of doing things wildly different and much more efficient has to be tempered with this monetary element there. So that said, Todd, how do we keep this on a leash? Maybe there's some guidance that you can provide to us. I've got a few things that I've done, but I'm sure there's some other things that you can share with the group here on how to still benefit from AI and not go swing the pendulum from token maxing to not using it at all, but putting some guardrails and some governance around that so that we can benefit, but not, at a king's ransom.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I also didn't have the same experience you did. I understand AI, and I understand the way the models work and the pricing, et cetera. I did the very same thing. I was in the middle of doing some prototyping for some work that we were doing as a team that I wanted to hand over to the team to review. And I also ran out of my credits. And so I did the same thing. I flipped it over to just the API spend, and I didn't pay attention to what was happening. And I used the best model available. Again, this non-compromising, this is code. We need it to be the best it can be. We don't want it to write slop or make any mistakes.
Yeah,
so I use the best.
Parking on that for just a minute, we all want the best of the best, right?
Yes. Yes.
And we don't want to compromise the quality of what AI is doing on our behalf. And so if you don't know what certain models can do and what their appropriate usage is, then most will just default to the best and damn the consequences on the back end. And that ends up manifesting in a really large bill. So that's interesting you're bringing that up.
I also was trying to figure out how I was going to explain this to our controller, that I had racked up another $3,000 approximately in coding bills on Amazon. But it was a lesson learned, and I started exploring some other techniques and processes that would allow us to do these coding or prototyping sessions and not have to spend so much money. The interesting thing is that as these models have gotten better and better, there's some techniques you can use that definitely apply to the technical world and the coding world, and maybe they apply to the knowledge worker world too, because we don't want our brokers to become prompt engineers. We know that our users they're recognized and experts at what they're able to do, which is out there doing deals and negotiations and networking. Let's keep them out of the prompt engineering worlds, but there are a few sort of tips. Yeah, let me give you 5 things, and I'll try to go in the order of how fast you can turn them on. So 1 is just putting the right model on the right job. 2, stop using the expensive model to do all the work. Let it manage instead. 3, cap it, put an alarm on it. 4, meter it before you scale it. And then 5, leash your agents and keep the context tidy. So let me take these in turn. 1, these smart models, the one that you want to be interacting with the most, they know how to delegate. And so it just takes a little bit of smart direction to instruct your agent. Don't do all this work yourself if you don't have to. Delegate it to sub-agents, and it'll happily do so. And the nice thing about that is that it actually will review the work that these lesser models that it delegated to. So when it comes back, it'll take a look at it, it'll correct it if necessary, but you just accomplished the same amount of work with a much lower price tag. So that's one way.
So you're delegating this work to a sub-agent that has been associated to a lower or more efficient token consumption model? Is that what you're...
Yeah, you didn't have to delegate. Just ask your favorite model to do it for you. So if you're working with Opus, ask Opus when you're going through your question session or whatever you're asking it to do, by using the keyword is like, is there any of this you can delegate? You're keeping in mind tokenomics. The agent has been built to understand how to delegate and when to delegate. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. But if you ask it to, it will. And in this case, I've noticed that I can get a lot more done and not see my usage. As you check your usage, you're seeing it run out quickly. It's like a gas meter. And when I'm having the model do more delegation, I don't want to have to do it myself. When the model's doing the delegation, then that gas meter is moving more slowly. Yeah, so the obvious one is you put a cap on it, and you probably should. Most of these platforms will let you set a limit at the firm level and then warn you before you get there. And you ought to find out what those thresholds really are, because they're a little different depending on what you're using. But by the way, I've come to think about that that the cap is more of a smoke alarm than the thermostat. So the woman who runs Anthropic's platform now, she was at Stripe before that, and they were just watching the AWS bill. And their approach was never to go ration the compute. It was more catch a runaway job and then find the engineer and ask him nicely to turn it off. I mean, nobody caps the electricity on the building, but you get an alert, you get to find out who left the lights on, and you have a 5-minute conversation about it.
I'd imagine that as we were talking about the models, having some that are more understanding of what the models are appropriate for, that you could maybe issue certain models to certain people so that they're not having to think about that, just taking that thought process out of the mix there. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, don't give everyone the Ferrari, in other words. I have to admit, when Fable was first released, it was very captivating. I immediately went to some of the other projects that I'd been working on that were the model just struggled and struggled. And there's one in particular where I don't know why, but it didn't matter. It was struggling solving this problem, and it was a coding issue, and it just couldn't do it. And so I'd shelved it and moved on to something else. And it was actually in anticipation of knowing that Fable was going to be released. And when it was released, the first thing I did is turn it on to that problem, and literally in 15 minutes, it had it solved. It's the drug pusher metaphor that you just mentioned. It's like, I want to use this model for everything now. The reality is now that it's been out a while, and now that some other less expensive models have also been released, you still can use these other models to get a lot done. So not everyone needs the Ferrari or the Pro version. You can use different kinds of mixes depending on what the job is.
Talk to us a little bit about this concept of metering. I would imagine there's some benchmarking that can be done. You talked about the hard cap, which is a bit abrupt, but maybe something that's more of just monitor as you go and having that be dialed into your strategy.
Yeah, this one's probably the least interesting of the 5. It's the one that actually saves you money, though. So know what one person costs you before you roll it out to 50. Pick a couple of brokers, watch them for 2 to 3 weeks, get yourself a real number per user, because you can't really govern what you can't see. And then while you're doing that, you go find out how many people at your firm are already paying for this themselves and just expensing it. And that number is always higher than leadership thinks it is. Most brokerages think of their AI spend as one line item. It's actually 11.
So it's almost self-awareness, self-discipline, as you mentioned. And now these tools are starting to bring to the surface an easier way to see that usage, a kind of a before and after. Here's where I stood before I started doing this batch processing, and here's where I stand afterwards. So I've noticed that those are much more readily available that allow someone to establish that self-discipline. So tell me a little bit about, it's all about agents, right? Being able to have the AI do something on your behalf without having to prompt it all the way through. It's a great idea, but as I don't know that I'd call what I did an agent, but a batch process. What are some things that you can convey to this audience about appropriate agent building and management of that so that it doesn't run away on you?
You're right. Identifying the work and matching it with the right agent is job number 1. Just like we've been discussing, you don't need a Fable or even an Opus model to do what might be routine batch job type work, reviewing and parsing data. If you have some jobs where it's processing incoming emails or looking at leads that are coming in, those are actually fine work for agents that aren't so, let's say, smart or intelligent, because they're the premier agents. So that's one. Some advanced techniques are to actually put within the agents themselves some stop gaps and other leash, let's call it leashing the agent, where the agent is actually aware of its own amount of work. And once it gets to where it's finished processing a certain number, it stops. And you become aware maybe the next morning or when you come back into work that it didn't get all that work done, but at least you put some control on what is getting done and you can decide for yourself, should it continue? Should we process this manually or something else in that case? So it's more of a gate in that case. I guess anyone who has gray in their hair or their beards like we do, we remember memory leaks. These were the things that some sort of runaway process in data processing or even in how the application was constructed. You didn't really know about it until you saw either the system crash or you saw that it was eating up your scaling algorithms. And so today it's very similar. It's token leaks. Bad setup, no routing, runs all night, and you find about it when you get the invoice. And then really, again, it's about context rot. If the agents are continuing to process work, the more work that they do, the more their context fills with information. And then at every turn, that information is getting sent back to the model and back. So it's costing you context. It's costing you tokens that you don't really need to be spending. So by keeping this organized and tidy and instructions clear, this can make a big difference as well.
So I'm guilty of that, right? I start a project or a thread inside of chat and it could last over weeks. And it's this long dialogue that I've had. And on occasion, I'll get this message, compacting so that I can continue. And that's probably because I'm not keeping my context tidy. So maybe a practical tip for those on the phone here, and candidly for me, if I have been doing that and there's this long thread there, what is something that's a practical, tactical takeaway that would allow for me to be more mindful of the tokens that are being consumed by my just doing that? Is there some mechanism or strategy or technique that I don't yet know about that could help me and others?
Yeah, the challenge I have is not answering your question with too much information because there's so much. This is a big topic out on the internet about about context management and context engineering. And so the simple things are, if you're at a natural stopping point in your task where the subject is about to change, don't be afraid to just clear the context, not even compact it. Compacting is getting better and better. The Anthropic and OpenAI and others have done a really nice job of keeping the agent in the smart zone, so to speak, which is when it has more context. As it starts to fill up, it'll start hallucinating. It'll start getting a little bit less quality in its answers. It'll get distracted a bit. And that's the telltale signs that your context is filling up, especially these million token context models. So if you're just at a stopping point, have faith and trust the model's going to be able to do its own refreshed research. Just go ahead and clear the context or start a new session and start fresh. That's probably the easiest and most simple way to think about it. If you're starting to see that the agent is getting a little bit distracted and you've been on a session pretty long, you can go ahead and initiate your own compact command. And it'll do that. And that's when you know that the agent still needs to have the history and what you're talking about. But probably what I've started to do is just make sure that the information that I want my agents to know about, it's actually in other files, that the agent can reach for. It's the rules. It's the main objective of whatever the task is. It's the skills. And so when the agent can reach for that information, no matter if it's a new agent or an existing agent, then you become less dependent on the agent's context. And when you just kick off a new agent, it will reach out to the files that it knows it can, and that whatever this topic is that you're using it for, and it'll pick up from where it left off in the smart zone. And so that's probably what I would say is the best method that you don't have to be a prompt engineer to implement.
Yeah, that's helpful because I'm definitely hampered by that. Well, let's wrap this up. I think the key takeaways for me are we still need to be using AI, but we need to be using it responsibly, deliberately before that meter catches up with you, right? So I think there are a couple things we've talked about in terms of getting smarter about what a task does and what it costs you. For instance, what does a comp analysis take to get done, or a deal summary? And getting smarter about what is that, and having that help you, guide you on what you should and shouldn't use AI for. The reality is, if you aren't careful, you can almost shut your brain off and just have it do everything. simple things like look up a contact record in a CRM system or summarize emails. Well, you could fairly quickly go to your inbox and sort by the recipient or the sender and get that same information. That's not an overly burdensome thing. And so I think we're going to have to start being mindful about that, and not just being lazy is probably the word that I will use for my own behaviors, and start being a bit more mindful about that and not deferring to, because it's easy and because we're there, AI, just do it for me. What other thoughts come to mind in terms of wrapping up, the key takeaways from today's call?
Yeah, the key takeaway is if you've been burned and you've been spooked, don't stop using AI. In fact, that's probably more expensive because your competitors are using it. So it is something that you need to learn how to use smartly. And there are ways and techniques, as we've discussed here, and probably many more. In fact, one method that you can use is just ask your agent directly. Just by making my agent understand that I'm on a plan that I need to be careful not to spend completely, work with me to preserve that plan and use it smartly, the agent becomes your partner in that task and will even proactively help you in this case. So that's probably one of the easiest things to do, is just ask your agent to be mindful of these tasks and not overdo it on many things.
And if I'm following you, once you do that, you could almost set that up as instructions for all of your sessions there that say, regardless of what I'm asking you to do, be mindful of token consumption and make decisions on my behalf to use subagents or switch models based on the relevance and the applicability of that task and the model that needs to be assigned to do it. Interesting.
That's probably one of the easiest things we didn't really even click on too strongly, was instead of defaulting to the most expensive model every time, default to the medium model and move up when you're not satisfied with what that medium model can do for you. So start with Sonnet, go up to Opus or up to Fable if you really have something that you need to spend time on and spend tokens on. But otherwise, many times you may find that the medium model is perfectly fine. But the main point, just make your agent aware, if you're in that interactive mode, that you need to be careful because you have a lot of work to do and you don't want to spend all your plan on today when you still have a week or two left.
Yeah, so we've got products out there that are based on AI models, and the question is pretty frequent. I just saw you do that demo for me. What did that cost me? What did that cost you? What's evolved is a calculator of sorts, and that we understand, because it's our product, what those things are. And so there's almost this reference that when you ask it to author an email, when you ask it to summarize a relationship or abstract a set of lease comps, there is almost this calculator, not almost, there is this calculator that shows you exactly what that is. And awareness of that and knowing what those price tags are will, as the metaphor I mentioned earlier, will help you shop more smartly. In that you don't see price tags, I'll take one of everything, is kind of how we're behaving. Well, that's not practical and that's not realistic. So it's all about getting smarter about that. And hopefully those are some strategies that we've uncovered today that will benefit you guys. Todd, any other wrap-up comments before we conclude?
Yeah, I think my last thought on it would be this. Everything we've talked about today is really about not wasting money. But honestly, the most expensive position in this whole thing is the firm that got spooked, capped everything, and just stopped. Because the people who aren't using it, they're burning money too. They just never get an invoice for it. The other thing I'd say is if you tried something last year and it didn't work, you should go try it again. These tools have moved twice since then. And I bet half or more of the AI can't do that list at most brokerages is out of date at this point. So don't stop. Just be a lot more deliberate about it. And if anybody wants help figuring out what that actually means, we built a calculator for that.
Thanks, Todd. Good stuff to ponder on. I think, as normal, there are episodes of our podcast that are stemming from this that we might dive in deeper. I think a subagent strategy podcast would be of interest to the folks here. So, well, thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully you found this valuable. Again, this is a continued podcast. We're going to continue to bring up the topics that we feel are compelling and perhaps not addressed appropriately and tackle them head on. So, Todd, thanks again for joining me. And
yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.